Yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, a programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. This week I was inspired by a brief piece in the Good News column, always a great place to put a smile on your face and make you think the world isn't just about to end, hopefully, on the Manx radio website under the news banner, and it was talking about the search for the perfect Manx menu. I think such talk has gone on for a long time, and what is, or is there such a thing as the Manx national dish, which sent me diving back into the archives to research this, Manx menus and Manx food and Manx foodstuffs. I take you back first to the Times, the Isle of Man Times of Saturday, October the 22nd, 1910. A short column entitled The Kipper, but not spelt as you might think. I don't know if this was an old Manx spelling. Khippa. And it goes on, apropos of the paragraph in this column on Saturday, another Epicurean writes to us, your remarks on the Chilean and Spanish national dishes are most interesting, but how many of your readers have tasted the old English national dish, the Epicurean cognomen for which, wonderful words, is Trypan Dunion? Now, I don't know what that is. Is that a fish? It certainly sounds like a Latin nomenclature to me. If you know what it is, then please let me know. Howard Kane at manxradio.com. On the other hand, the article goes on, the old Manx national dish, the Kipper, spelt Khippa, retains all its old popularity among the natives on the island. And this is from the Liverpool Journal of Commerce, we are told. In the Peel City Guardian of Saturday, November the 20th, 1915, there's a lengthy piece in tiny print, as was often the case. How people read it, I don't know, particularly when light wasn't good. Tom Brown Festival. The third Tom Brown Festival, under the auspices of the World Manx Association, was held in Collister's Palace Restaurant, Douglas, on Friday evening of last week. The first part of the proceedings was a Manx tea, the menu being flour cake, oat cake, potato cake, you get the gist of it. Barley, yes, you're right, cake, currant cake, binjane and tea. Now, I take it it's bin Jane or binjane, Bingean. Again, is that yoghurt or milk pudding or something? What is binjane? Someone can tell me, no doubt. Howard Kane at manxradio.com. And after full justice had been done to the tea, the second part of the programme was proceeded with, I think there might be a misprint there, a lot of cake and binjane. I'm intrigued. We skip forward a little bit further to the Mona's Herald, Tuesday, June the 17th, 1941. Extra cheese for the man, we are told, but not for the boss. Under the rationing of cheese order, if you knew such a thing existed, an agricultural worker can, if he applies on the requisite form, obtain a ration of 8 ounces weekly, but the farmer who employs him with all the members of his family must be content with the 1 ounce ration weekly each, the same as the rest of the community, as they are not eligible for the special ration. This, of course, during the war years. No one, not even the farmers, will begrudge the agricultural worker this privilege. Cheese never did bulk large in the Manx farmhouse menu anyway, and what, after all, are a few vitamins when weighed in the balance against subsidies. Then, too, the food controller must go warily. After this month, it is said, there will be no imported cheese. The island will have to depend on what it can produce itself. And we can produce quite a lot when we turn our minds to it, can't we? Quite where we are on that cycle at the moment, I wouldn't like to say. Skipping forward a bit further, still in the war years, Friday, July the 9th, 1943, in the Isle of Man Examiner. Melting Pot is the article, or at least the column. Blackpool Holiday is the title. Sirius, the Blackpool Gazette columnist, whose story about the Douglas Pier being cluttered up with such things as confiscated grapefruits we told last week, has another story about his holiday on the island. On the train from Peel to Douglas, he spoke with a Manx woman who'd spent a holiday in Blackpool. I went there for a change, she said. I came home for a rest. The Blackpool boarding house refused them a cup of tea after their rough crossing, and later in the week turned down a request to take their wet clothes into the kitchen to dry. To add to the trouble, she had taken 24 eggs with her from the Isle of Man. How she got them away is not told, and handed them to the boarding house keeper. Most of the eggs went into the pool, and one day she was actually served with dried eggs. People might remember those. She was allowed 2 shillings per dozen for them, though they had cost her 3 and 6 per dozen. The house was not far from the promenade, but out of sight of the sea. And for all this she was charged 13 and 6 per day, with another 9 and 6 per day for her 5-year-old son. This is what comes of breaking the once well-known commandment, spend your holidays in the Isle of Man. Well, we did that again during lockdown, I think, didn't we? It goes on in the same column but a separate piece. Our well-fed soldiers. Writing home from the Middle East, Sergeant William McCormick of Parliament Street in Ramsey enclosed a copy of the week's menu typical of what the Manx boys in his unit are getting. Readers will come to the same conclusion as ourselves that for wartime fare overseas it is tip-top. The first day, Sunday, June the 14th, 1943, the boys had breakfast, fried eggs and bread, margarine and tea. Tiffin, or lunch, cold mutton, salad, bread, margarine, jam and tea. Dinner, roast mutton, roast potatoes, boiled marrow, stewed prunes, custard, and, you've guessed it, tea. And then supper, bread, marge, cheese, and altogether now, tea. The breakfast varied from fried fish to bacon or eggs, marmalade, etc. Lunch on weekdays included such items as cottage pie, bully fritters, hamburger, or hamburger roast, as it's listed, cheese and onion pasties, rissoles, you don't hear of those these days, do you? Cold beef and salad. For dinner, the boys that week had roast mutton, featured large, Yorkshire pudding, beans, jam roll, a favourite, stewed steak and onions again, stewed apple and custard, meat and potato pie, apple tart, fried onions, mutton chops, beetroot, rice pudding, raisin, roll, etc., etc. They were quite well fed, it seemed. They needed to be. It was a tough time. After the war now, the Examiner of Friday, December the 25th, Christmas Day, 1953. Boarding house keepers want Manx lamb for visitors, we're told. If a satisfied visitor is one of the island's best advertisements, the Executive Committee of the Douglas Residential Hotel and Boarding House Association consider that one of the best ways to make satisfied visitors is for members to feature real Manx lamb on their menus. The committee have been considering the possibility of meat being decontrolled next year, which opens up a prospect of hotels and boarding houses being able to get what they require, instead of having to take whatever is on offer. Before the war, in a free market, the butchers adjusted their trade to the requirements of those catering for visitors, and in addition to being able to supply all the fresh Manx lamb that was needed, were in a position to import prime cuts. The Executive Committee have therefore decided to press for steps to be taken to restore the pre-war supply position, so that the customer determines the market, and not the market the customer. In the Alabama Times of Friday, March the 7th, 1958, there's a piece entitled, "Why Not Spuds and Herring?" with no G. "We could give them the Manx national dish of spuds and herring," is quoted in Mr. J. Harrison Quirk at Wednesday night's meeting of the Peel Town Commissioners, when a letter was read from the Secretary of the International Celtic Congress asking if the Commissioners would care to entertain the delegates when they came to the island from April the 8th to April the 14th. "And it would not do them any harm. As a matter of fact, I'm sure they would really enjoy it," commented Chairman Mr. George Gale, who said, of course, they'd also give them buttermilk to drink with it. The Secretary stated the delegates will be entertained at Government House on Wednesday, April the 9th. 50 delegates were expected, including the Chief Justice of Ireland, His Honour Conor Maguire. Mr. T.E. Cowell said they should do everything in their power for their visitors. The Commissioners agreed to entertain the delegates to lunch on a date to be fixed by the Congress Secretary. And then a couple of interesting pieces to finish off as we skip to 1958 in the Examiner, Thursday, January the 16th, on Fenella's page for women. Eunice Salmond, of course, Fenella, well known for many a year in Manx journalistic circles for her society columns quite often. Loved writing about society, in particular anything to do with royal connections or royalty itself. Hostess to the Queen, the piece is entitled. What would you do if you were suddenly faced with the thrilling yet terrifying prospect of entertaining Her Majesty the Queen to lunch? Would you worry about your worn curtains and carpets, consider a menu of out-of-season delicacies, and wonder if you had sufficient silver and flowers to really make your home fit for a queen? I'm sure we all would. Just as any other housewife, these were some of the immediate queries which faced Lady Dundas when she first knew that the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh were to spend an hour and a half at Government House during the lunch interval of that memorable one-day visit to the Isle of Man in 1954. The meticulous preparations beforehand and the tightly scheduled, unforgettable day itself were the subject of a highly entertaining talk given by our Governor's wife on Tuesday to the Douglas branch of the British Legion Women's Section at the Anne Hathaway Cafe. You get a gold star if you know where the Anne Hathaway Cafe was. The audience was so attentive and so absorbed throughout Lady Dundas's talk that to report it in detail would, I feel, be most unfair. I know that many of the island's women organisations will be just as eager and as interested to hear this talk as we were on Tuesday, and I understand it was only the third time it has been given. First-hand descriptions and anecdotes of our beloved royal couple are dear to the hearts of most women. I couldn't help but feel and share the wave of feminine understanding which was extended by the audience to Lady Dundas, as she described what must be the most exacting role any housewife could dream of being called upon to play. I'm sure you all agree. How the problem of worn furnishings and exterior decoration was solved by the property trustees were equally keen that everything should be just right. How Lady Dundas borrowed silver from her friends to supplement the enormous amount required. How 46 large and exquisite flower arrangements graced Government House that day, or at least for 90 minutes of it, and why a Manx menu was decided upon. These all made fascinating listening. So too were Lady Dundas's descriptions of the grace, charm and thoughtfulness of the royal visitors and the few human and later amusing things that went wrong behind the scenes. A great character, Eunice, in her day, as was the Queen, of course. And finally, we hear that Manx broth is on London menus. This is from the Examiner, Thursday, August the 20th, 1959. A picture detailed. The picture above is a snapshot taken some years ago of former actor Mr. Sidney J. Poulter. His stage name was Robert Brasher, whose death at the age of 72 at his Surrey home this week is announced in today's Examiner. With him in the picture, his widowed actress wife, Mrs. Olive Poulter. My older readers will remember the Poulters as one of the best-known families in Douglas and in the London Manx community too. Miss Marjorie Poulter now resides in Park Road, Douglas, and the other evening she helped me to recall my own personal memories of her late brother, Sidney, and the prominent part he played for so many years, first in the theatrical profession and later in London's West End restaurant life. Up to the early 1920s, Sidney (Robert Brasher) and his wife played principal roles in many touring productions, including The Luck of the Navy and The Middle Watch, in which they visited the Gaiety in Douglas during the one-time summer seasons of drama and musical comedy. In the early days of their association with the Isle of Man, the Poulter family ran the Belvedere Hotel on Douglas Promenade. Still there, I think, isn't it? Mr. Fred C. Poulter was a fine musician and conductor of the Douglas Choral Union Orchestra. His wife, Mrs. G. M. Poulter, played leading parts in the DCU's productions. She'll be well remembered, I feel certain, and would have loved Chicago. Mr. Poulter died in 1919 at the age of 65, and eventually the family settled in London. Sidney lived in a cottage near Dulwich College called Mona Cottage, while Mr. and Miss Poulter resided in the nearby Greba Cottage. Sidney retired from the stage around 1923 and opened the first of his famous London restaurants, the Stage Door, later followed by the Prompt Corner and the Aldwych restaurants. For his first 6 months at the Stage Door, his mother did the first-rate cooking, and every week there was Manx broth on the menu. Famous West End personalities loved it, and when it ceased to be on the bill of fare after Mrs. Poulter left, they kept asking, "Where's the Manx broth?" Incidentally, I was then living and working as a journalist in London and recall the many enjoyable meals I had at the Prompt Corner, at which Mr. Poulter engaged unemployed actresses as waitresses. I think that's still pretty common amongst the acting profession, as they say, when you're resting. Waiting on, still quite favoured in order to pay the bills. Food is never that far away from the Manx papers, it would seem. Quite what a Manx menu is or what the Manx national dish is might exercise minds for some time. But it will, of course, all be old news. Until next week, cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.